The hospital staff tried to send Atlas away, but the German Shepherd had already heard what no machine had noticed. Caleb Rose stood in the bright hallway of St. Mercy Hospital on the Oregon coast, one hand on the leash, the other still holding the discharge papers from his routine checkup. Everything around him smelled of antiseptic, raincoats, and paper cups of old coffee. Shoes whispered over polished tile. A monitor beeped somewhere beyond a half-closed door. Nurses moved with the calm urgency of people who had learned to carry worry without spilling it. Caleb did not like hospitals. He never said that out loud, because Marines were not supposed to dislike rooms built to save people. But certain sounds stayed with a man. The soft roll of wheels. The clipped rhythm of medical voices. The silence after someone closed a curtain. Atlas usually sensed that unease and walked close, steady as a hand on the shoulder. The sable black and tan German Shepherd was calm enough that most people smiled when they passed him, then forgot he was there. But as Caleb turned toward the exit, Atlas stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. His paws locked against the cool tile outside the pediatric wing, ears lifting, amber eyes fixed on a door halfway down the hall. Room 214. Caleb gave the leash a light touch. Come on, boy. Atlas did not move. He lowered his nose toward the narrow gap beneath the door, breathed in once, then sat. No bark. No growl. No drama. Just one front paw placed firmly on the floor, as if he had reached an invisible line he would not cross. Caleb felt the change before he understood it. The hallway seemed to narrow around them. A child laughed weakly from another room. Rain ticked against the windows at the far end of the corridor. A security officer approached with a polite but firm expression, followed by an administrative nurse holding a clipboard. Sir, dogs are not allowed past this point unless they are cleared service animals for this unit, the nurse said. Caleb nodded immediately. I understand. We were leaving. He looked down. Atlas heel. The command was quiet, familiar, one Atlas had obeyed hundreds of times in parking lots, parks, grocery aisles, and crowded sidewalks. This time, the dog turned his head toward Caleb but stayed seated. Caleb's throat tightened. Atlas had never refused him out of stubbornness. Not once. The security officer took a step closer. Sir, I need you to bring him out now. Caleb opened his mouth to apologize again, but Atlas shifted his gaze past them, toward a nurse coming out of the medication room. She was in her late 30s, with tired, kind eyes, brown hair tied back, and the steady posture of someone who had spent long hours noticing small changes before they became big ones. Her badge read Hannah Miller. She stopped when she saw Atlas. Not at the leash. Not at Caleb. At the dog's stillness. Atlas looked straight at her, then back at room 214. Hannah's face changed. Just slightly. Enough for Caleb to see that she had heard the silence too. Wait, she said, raising one hand gently. The hallway quieted around that single word. Atlas remained seated, solemn and unmoving, as if all his life had led him to this cold tile, this closed door, this one human willing to listen. Hannah did not move toward the door right away. She stood still in the hallway, studying Atlas the way a person studies a quiet sky before a storm, looking for the small signs everyone else has learned to ignore. The German Shepherd's ears were high, but not sharp with aggression. His tail was low, but not tucked in fear. His body was firm, focused, patient, and his amber eyes kept returning to room 214 with the same steady insistence. Caleb felt the leash slack in his hand. He wanted to help, but he also wanted to obey the rules, and those two instincts pulled against each other in the clean white light of the pediatric wing. Ma'am, the security officer said carefully, we need to clear the hallway. Hannah lifted one hand again, not harshly, only enough to ask for one more breath of time. I know, she said. Then she looked at Caleb. Is he usually this still? Caleb shook his head once. He is calm, but not like this. Hannah stepped closer, leaving space between herself and Atlas. Has he had sent training? Caleb hesitated. Not officially with me. His records were incomplete when I adopted him, but he notices things before I do. The sentence sounded strange after he said it. Too soft for a hospital corridor, too close to faith. Hannah did not smile. She only nodded as if that kind of answer belonged here more than people realized. Sometimes animals notice changes we do not, she said. Breathing, stress, chemistry, tiny things. The administrative nurse shifted her clipboard against her chest. Hannah, there is a family in there. We cannot have a dog blocking the hall. I am not saying we let him in, Hannah replied. I am saying we look. Atlas gave a low sound then, barely more than air moving through his throat. Not a growl, a pressure, a plea without volume. Caleb felt it in his bones. Hannah turned toward room 214 and gently pushed the door open. Inside, the room was dim except for the soft blue glow of a monitor and the gray daylight coming through rain-streaked windows. A boy slept in the bed, small beneath a white blanket patterned with tiny sailboats. He looked about 8 years old, with dark blonde hair flattened against his forehead and one arm resting over the covers. Beside the bed, his mother slept in a chair, her hand still holding the edge of the blanket as if she had fallen asleep mid-prayer. A green backpack sat under the chair, half open. Caleb stayed at the doorway with Atlas, careful not to cross the line. Hannah entered quietly and looked first at the monitor. The numbers were there, steady enough. No alarm, no urgent flashing lights, nothing that would have stopped a busy hallway. Then she looked at the boy's face. Her expression changed by a fraction. Caleb saw it. The way her eyes narrowed, not in panic, but in attention. She moved closer and touched the boy's wrist gently. He did not wake. His mother stirred, blinking in confusion. Is something wrong? She whispered. Hannah kept her voice calm. I just want to check on Noah for a moment. At the sound of the boy's name, Atlas leaned forward but still did not step inside. His nose pointed toward the green backpack, then back to the bed. Hannah followed the movement with her eyes. The mother sat up straighter. That is his bag, she said. His snacks and things are in there. Hannah glanced at Caleb once, then crouched to unzip the bag a little wider. Inside was a small medical snack container, a folded sweatshirt, and an old plush German shepherd with one ear bent permanently to the side. The mother looked at the toy and covered her mouth. He calls that his brave dog, she whispered. Atlas remained at the threshold, unmoving. Hannah stood again and looked at Noah more closely. His breathing had changed. Only slightly. A pause where there should have been rhythm. A faint paleness around the mouth. The monitor still did not complain. But Hannah had stopped trusting the machine more than the quiet. I need a glucose check and the attending, she said, calm but firm. The administrative nurse stared at her. Hannah did not raise her voice. Now, please. Caleb looked down at Atlas. The dog's paw was still planted on the tile, as steady as a promise no one had asked for, but everyone suddenly needed. The room changed without becoming loud. That was what Caleb noticed first. No one rushed in with panic. No alarm screamed from the monitor. No one shouted orders across the bed. Instead, the air tightened with quiet purpose, the way a shoreline changes just before the tide turns. Hannah moved with steady hands, checking Noah while another nurse arrived with the glucose kit, and the attending physician stepped in moments later, still buttoning the cuff of his white coat. Noah's mother stood beside the chair, one hand pressed against her chest, her eyes moving from her son to Atlas and back again. He was fine, she whispered. He was sleeping. I thought he was finally resting. Hannah looked at her gently. You did nothing wrong, Mrs. Bennett. Sometimes the signs are very small. Caleb remained at the doorway, keeping Atlas outside the room because the boundary mattered. The German shepherd seemed to understand. He did not push. He did not pace. He simply sat at the threshold, gaze fixed on the boy, ears making tiny adjustments to every breath, every soft word, every will rolling past in the hallway. The attending physician checked Noah's chart, asked about his last meal, his medication schedule, his procedure earlier that morning. The answers came in fragments from Noah's mother, tired and frightened, but Hannah gathered them carefully, never making her feel blamed. When the glucose result appeared, the doctor's expression shifted into focus. Not fear. Focus. Good catch, he said quietly. Hannah did not look proud. She looked relieved. Let us correct it now, the doctor said. A nurse brought what was needed, and they worked calmly around Noah, speaking to him even as he slept. Caleb looked down at Atlas. The dog's eyes had softened, but he still did not look away. Caleb had seen that kind of loyalty before, in different places, under different lights. The refusal to leave until the breathing steadied. The belief that staying could be a form of action. Minutes passed slowly. Rain blurred the hospital windows, turning the parking lot into streaks of gray and silver. Somewhere down the hall, a child laughed at a cartoon playing too loudly. A janitor pushed a mop bucket past and slowed, sensing the hush, then moved on. The world kept moving while one small room became the center of all mercy. Noah stirred. His fingers curled against the blanket. His mother leaned closer, whispering his name. Hannah watched the monitor, then Noah's face, then Atlas. The boy's color began to return little by little, like dawn finding a room through closed blinds. The doctor nodded once. He is responding. The words did not fill the room like celebration. They landed softly, with the weight of a prayer answered before anyone had found the courage to speak it. Noah's mother covered her eyes and breathed out a sound that was almost a sob, almost a laugh, and entirely relief. Caleb looked away, giving her privacy, but the sound followed him into an old part of himself. He remembered hospital hallways where hope had felt too fragile to touch. He remembered machines that sounded certain until they were not. He remembered wishing, years ago, that someone had noticed one small change sooner. Atlas shifted then and pressed his shoulder lightly against Caleb's leg. Not enough to distract, just enough to anchor him. Hannah stepped back from the bed and came to the doorway. She crouched a few feet from Atlas, close enough to honor him, far enough to respect him. "You knew before we did," she said softly. Atlas blinked once, calm and solemn. Caleb swallowed. He would not leave. Hannah looked up at him. "Then it is good you listened." Caleb shook his head, eyes still on the dog. He listened first. Inside the room, Noah opened his eyes halfway. His gaze wandered past his mother, past Hannah, past the doctor, until it found the German shepherd at the door. His lips moved faintly around one tired word. "Dog." Atlas's tail touched the floor once. Only once. But in that small movement, the whole hallway seemed to breathe again. Noah's mother was named Emily Bennett, and she kept one hand on the bed rail, as if the room might drift away without her holding it in place. Her son was awake now, not fully, not brightly, but enough to follow the shape of Atlas through the doorway with tired eyes. The doctor had explained the change in simple words, careful words, the kind meant to steady a parent instead of frighten her. Noah had needed attention sooner than anyone expected. Hannah had noticed. Atlas had noticed first. That truth sat in the room like warm light. Caleb remained outside the threshold, because permission mattered and because he had learned long ago that helping did not always mean stepping closer. The administrative nurse who had wanted Atlas removed stood near the wall now, clipboard lowered, her expression softened by the kind of humility hospitals sometimes teach in an instant. The security officer gave Caleb a small nod, not an apology exactly, but something close enough. Caleb accepted it with a quiet nod of his own. There was no blame to pass around. Only a boy breathing easier. Only a dog who had refused to leave. Noah shifted beneath the sailboat blanket, his fingers moving weakly toward the green backpack under the chair. Emily saw it and reached down, pulling out the old plush German shepherd with the bent ear. She placed it beside him, and Noah's hand closed around it with a familiar kind of trust. His eyes stayed on Atlas. "Can he come in?" Noah whispered. The room paused. Caleb looked to Hannah first. Hannah looked to the doctor. The doctor considered for a moment, then glanced at the hand sanitizer on the wall, the clean floor, the calm dog, the child watching with more hope than strength. "For 1 minute," he said gently. "At the doorway. We keep it calm." Caleb crouched beside Atlas and spoke near his ear. "Easy, boy." Atlas rose as if he understood every boundary in the room. He stepped only 2 feet inside, then sat again, leaving space around the bed, his paws lined neatly on the tile. Emily covered her mouth as Noah smiled for the first time since waking. It was a small smile, fragile as morning frost, but it changed everything. Noah lifted the plush dog slightly. "This is Scout," he said. His voice was rough and soft. "I told Mom he would know." Emily looked at Caleb, confused, and moved at once. "Before he fell asleep," she said, "he kept saying he wished his brave dog could tell us if something was wrong. I thought he meant the toy." Hannah knelt beside the bed, her eyes damp but steady. "Maybe he did," she said. "Maybe he meant both." Caleb felt the words settle somewhere deep, where old hospital memories had been stored without air. Atlas looked at Noah, then lowered his head just enough for the boy to see his amber eyes clearly. Noah did not reach out. No one asked him to. The moment did not need touching to be real. The monitor beside the bed continued its soft rhythm, no longer ignored, no longer worshipped, simply doing its part. But Caleb understood now that machines were not the only witnesses in a room. Sometimes a dog heard the tremble beneath the numbers. Sometimes a nurse trusted the pause before the alarm. Sometimes a Marine, who had spent years believing control was the same as courage, learned that courage could also mean standing still while another living soul pointed the way. Hannah rose and turned to Caleb. "He should not have been here by policy," she said quietly. Then she looked down at Atlas. "But I am very glad he was." Caleb placed a hand on Atlas's shoulder. The fur was warm beneath his palm, steady, alive. "So am I," he said. Noah's eyes fluttered, growing heavy again. But before sleep took him back, he looked at Atlas and whispered, "Good dog." Atlas's tail moved once against the tile. Outside the window, the Oregon rain softened, and for the first time since Caleb had entered St. Mercy, the sound of a hospital did not feel like a memory closing in. It felt like life continuing, one small breath at a time. The rain had nearly stopped by the time Caleb and Atlas left St. Mercy Hospital, but neither of them moved toward the parking lot right away. Caleb stood beneath the covered entrance with the leash loose in his hand, watching water drip from the edge of the awning in slow silver threads. Behind the glass doors, the hospital continued its quiet rhythm. Nurses crossed the lobby. Visitors carried flowers and paper bags. A little boy in a wheelchair rolled past with a blanket over his knees and a sticker on his shirt. Ordinary scenes, ordinary mercy, ordinary fear being held together by people who had learned not to look away. Atlas sat beside Caleb, calm again, the dark collar resting against his thick sable fur. He did not seem tired. He did not seem proud. He only watched the doors as if waiting to make sure the small room upstairs stayed safe after they left. Caleb looked down at him and let out a breath he had been holding since room 214. "You always know when to stay," he said quietly. Atlas blinked once. A simple answer from a creature who had never needed language to be clear. Caleb's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from Hannah Miller, sent through the number she had written on the back of a hospital card before he left the unit. "Noah is stable. He is asking whether the dog has a name." Caleb read it twice, and something in his chest eased. He typed back slowly, because the words mattered more than he expected. "His name is Atlas." Then, after a pause, he added, "Tell Noah he did good too." The reply came a minute later. He smiled. Caleb slipped the phone away and looked out across the wet parking lot. The clouds had opened near the horizon, revealing a thin band of pale gold over the Pacific. It should have been a beautiful sight. For Caleb, it was beautiful and difficult at the same time. Hospitals did that to him. They pulled old doors open without asking. He remembered another hallway years earlier, another set of machines, another family waiting for news that arrived too late. He had carried the memory like a sealed box, telling himself it was discipline when really it was fear. Fear of noticing too late. Fear of trusting too little. Fear of hearing a quiet warning and not knowing what to do with it. Atlas leaned into his leg then, warm and solid. Caleb lowered one hand to the dog's head, fingers sinking into damp fur. "I almost made you leave," he whispered. The admission hurt. Not because Atlas would blame him. Atlas did not carry blame that way. It hurt because Caleb knew how close he had come to choosing the safer rule over the truer signal. He had wanted to be respectful, invisible, easy to manage. He had wanted not to cause trouble. But sometimes mercy looked inconvenient before it looked holy. The automatic doors opened behind them, and Hannah stepped outside, still in scrubs, her hair loosened at the temples from a long shift. She held 2 paper cups of coffee. "Figured you might still be here," she said, offering one. Caleb accepted it with a nod. For a moment, they stood side by side under the awning, watching the rain fade. Hannah looked at Atlas. "I have seen therapy dogs comfort patients," she said. "I have seen service dogs alert their handlers. But that was different." Caleb did not answer right away. Atlas's ears turned toward her voice. Hannah continued softly. "He was not asking permission to be special. He was asking us to pay attention." Caleb looked through the glass doors toward the pediatric wing above, though he could not see it from there. "I think he has been trying to teach me that for a long time." Hannah smiled faintly. "Some teachers have pause." Caleb looked down at Atlas, and the dog lifted his eyes, steady and amber beneath the gray Oregon light. For the first time that day, Caleb smiled without forcing it. The hospital no longer felt like a place only filled with endings. Not completely. Somewhere inside, a boy was breathing easier. A mother was holding his hand. A nurse had listened to a dog. And a Marine who had spent years trusting commands more than silence had begun to understand that grace sometimes arrives without an alarm, sits down on cold tile, and refuses to move until somebody finally notices. Caleb drove home from St. Mercy with Atlas stretched across the back seat, the dog's head resting near the window as the Oregon coast slid past in shades of gray, green, and fading gold. The rain had left the roads shining, and every passing streetlight seemed to break itself into long ribbons across the windshield. Caleb kept both hands on the wheel. He usually drove in silence after hospital visits, letting the quiet settle before it could turn into memory. But that evening, silence did not feel like a threat. It felt like a room with a door open. Atlas breathed steadily behind him, and every few miles Caleb glanced in the rearview mirror, catching the amber eyes already watching him back. "You scared me today," Caleb said at last. Atlas gave no answer, except for the soft shift of his collar against the seat. Caleb almost laughed, but it came out as a breath. "Not because you were wrong, because you were right." When they reached Caleb's small house outside town, the yard smelled of wet pine needles and clean earth. Caleb unlocked the door, hung the leash on its hook, and moved through the familiar routine. Water in Atlas's bowl, boots near the mat, discharge papers on the kitchen table. The house was modest, tidy, and plain, with a coffee mug in the sink and a folded blanket on the couch. Nothing dramatic waited there. No hospital lights, no monitors, no clipboard voices. Just home. Atlas drank, then came to sit beside Caleb's chair as if the day was not finished until the man finally sat down too. Caleb obeyed. He lowered himself into the chair and stared at the papers from his checkup without reading them. His own visit had been simple. Blood pressure, shoulder mobility, a few questions about sleep. The usual polite answers. Fine. Managing. Doing better. Words that fit neatly into boxes. But nothing about room 214 fit into a box. Nothing about a dog refusing a command. Nothing about a nurse trusting stillness. Nothing about a boy waking and whispering one word like it had been placed in his heart before he understood why. Caleb reached down and rested his hand on Atlas's head. The fur between the dog's ears was dry now, warm beneath his palm. "I keep thinking about Noah," he said, "and his mom." Atlas leaned into his hand. Caleb closed his eyes, and this time the old memory came without tearing through him. A younger version of himself in another hospital hallway. A family waiting. A doctor speaking softly. The helplessness of arriving close, but not close enough. For years, Caleb had blamed himself for not hearing what no one had said. He had believed vigilance meant never missing anything. But Atlas had shown him something gentler. No living soul could catch every falling thing. Sometimes the mercy was not in knowing everything. Sometimes it was in listening when the smallest sign finally reached you. His phone buzzed on the table. Another message from Hannah. Noah wants to know if Atlas likes drawings. Caleb looked down at the dog. "Do you like drawings?" Atlas blinked slowly, solemn as a judge. Caleb typed back, "He has excellent taste in art." Then he sat there smiling at the screen like a man caught off guard by light. Later that night, after the house had gone dark, Caleb did not turn on the television. He did not pace the hallway. He sat on the kitchen floor with Atlas beside him, the dog's shoulder against his ribs, both of them listening to rainwater drip from the gutters. The hospital was miles away, but something from that hallway had followed them home. Not fear this time. Not grief. A quieter thing. The knowledge that some warnings come softly, and some prayers are answered by those patient enough to stay. A week passed before Caleb returned to St. Mercy Hospital, but the memory of room 214 seemed to ride beside him the whole way. This time, he was not there for himself. Hannah had called 2 days earlier, her voice careful but warm, explaining that Noah Bennett had been asking about Atlas, and that the pediatric floor director wanted to meet them under proper guidelines. Proper guidelines. Caleb respected those words. They meant boundaries. They meant safety. They meant no one had to choose between compassion and order. So that Thursday afternoon, he arrived with Atlas freshly brushed, collar clean, leash short and loose, vaccination papers tucked into a folder beneath his arm. The hospital looked different when he walked in by choice. The glass doors opened with the same soft sigh. The lobby still smelled of antiseptic, coffee, and rain-damp coats. But Caleb did not feel the old pressure closing around his ribs. Not as tightly. Atlas walked at his left side, steady and calm, sable fur catching the pale light from the high windows. A little girl near the reception desk pointed at him and whispered to her father. Atlas did not turn. His attention stayed forward, as if he understood this was not a visit for attention. It was a return to a promise. Hannah met them by the elevators with a visitor badge and a smile that carried the fatigue of a long shift, but none of the doubt from that day. "He looks official," she said, glancing at Atlas. Caleb looked down at the dog's dark collar. "He is trying not to let it go to his head." Hannah laughed softly, and the sound loosened something in the lobby. They rode up together in the elevator, where Atlas sat without being asked, his reflection mirrored in the stainless steel doors. Caleb watched the floor numbers rise. 2, 3, 4. He expected the old discomfort to return, but what came instead was a strange quiet. Not peace exactly. More like permission to stand in a place that once hurt and find something living there. When the elevator opened onto the pediatric wing, the hallway paused. A nurse at the desk looked up, recognized Atlas, and smiled. The same security officer from the first day stood near the double doors. He gave Caleb a nod, warmer this time. "Good to see you both back," he said. Caleb returned the nod. "Good to be back." The words surprised him because they were true. Hannah led them to a small family lounge instead of Noah's room, a bright space with washable chairs, a low bookshelf, and paper stars taped to the windows. Noah sat on the couch with Emily beside him, thinner than Caleb remembered but brighter around the eyes. In his lap was the old plush German shepherd with the bent ear. When he saw Atlas, Noah sat up carefully, his smile arriving before his voice. "Mom," he whispered. He came. Atlas stopped at the doorway and looked to Caleb. "Waiting. Always waiting." Caleb gave the smallest nod. The German shepherd entered slowly and sat 3 feet from the couch, close enough to be real, far enough to be respectful. Noah held up a folded piece of paper with both hands. "I made him something," he said. Caleb felt Hannah go still beside him. Atlas leaned forward, ears soft, as if he already knew that some gifts were not made of paper at all, but of breath, courage, and a child who had been heard before the room knew how to listen. Noah unfolded the paper with the careful pride of a child offering something larger than himself. The drawing showed the hallway outside room 214, though the lines wobbled and the doors leaned at impossible angles. There was a nurse with brown hair, a Marine in an olive jacket, a mother beside a bed, and a German shepherd sitting on the tile with one paw drawn bigger than the rest of him. Around that paw, Noah had colored a ring of yellow light. Underneath, in thick blue marker, were the words, "He knew before the beeps did." Caleb read the sentence once and felt the room grow quiet in a way no one had arranged. Hannah covered her mouth with 2 fingers, her eyes shining. Emily Bennett looked down at her son, as if she were seeing both his fear and his courage at the same time. Atlas sat still, accepting the drawing with the solemn patience of an old chaplain listening to a confession. "That is very good, Noah," Caleb said, and his voice came out lower than he expected. Noah looked at Atlas. "Can he see it?" Caleb glanced at Hannah, then at Emily, and when both nodded, he stepped closer and crouched beside the dog. Noah held the paper out. Atlas leaned forward, sniffed the edge once, then gave the smallest warm breath across the crayon lines. Noah smiled so wide that the whole room seemed to brighten. "He likes it," he whispered. "He has excellent taste," Caleb said. Hannah laughed softly, but there was a tremble in it. The director of the pediatric floor arrived a few minutes later, a kind woman with silver glasses and a badge clipped to a navy cardigan. She had heard the story from 3 different people, she said, and each version ended the same way. A dog sat down, a nurse paid attention, and a child received help before the alarms ever had to beg for it. She spoke with Caleb about paperwork, supervised visits, training review, health records, hospital policy, all the necessary human scaffolding around a mercy that had arrived without forms. Caleb listened carefully. He respected every rule now more than before, because the right rule did not erase compassion. It protected it. Atlas laid down at his feet while they talked, head resting on his paws, the yellow light from Noah's drawing still fresh in Caleb's mind. Across the lounge, Noah held Scout, the plush German shepherd, and watched Atlas as if watching proof that wishes sometimes find their way through closed doors. When the meeting ended, Hannah asked if Noah could place the drawing on the pediatric thank you board near the nurse's station. Caleb did not answer for the dog. He only looked down. Atlas lifted his head, calm and steady. That was enough. They walked together into the hallway. This time, no one asked them to leave. Nurses moved past with soft smiles. The security officer opened the double doors. Emily guided Noah slowly beside the wall, one hand on his shoulder, the other holding the drawing. At the board, Noah reached up, but he was still too short, so Hannah lifted him just enough for him to press the paper into place with a blue magnet shaped like a star. The drawing settled among cards, handprints, crooked hearts, and thank you notes from children who had been afraid and found kindness anyway. Caleb stood back with Atlas at his side. He looked at the words again. He knew before the beeps did. For years, Caleb had thought healing would arrive loudly, with certainty, with something undeniable enough to silence the past. But here it was instead, taped to a hospital board in a child's handwriting, watched over by a tired nurse, a grateful mother, a recovering boy, and a German shepherd who had only done what love does when no one else hears it. He stayed. A month later, the hallway outside room 214 no longer felt like a place where fear had stopped time. It had become part of St. Mercy Hospital's quiet rhythm. Polished tile, soft shoes, rain tapping the windows, nurses speaking in low voices, children wheeling past with blankets and sticker charts. On Thursday afternoons, Caleb and Atlas came through the front doors with visitor badges and clean paws, following every rule, pausing at every desk, waiting for every nod. Caleb had once believed rules and mercy stood on opposite sides of a door. Now he saw how the right people could hold both open. Atlas never rushed toward anyone. He sat when children approached. He lowered his head for small hands. He let nervous parents watch from a distance until trust arrived on its own. Noah was stronger now. Some days he met them in the family lounge with Scout tucked under one arm. Some days he only waved from his doorway, too tired for company, but bright enough to smile when Atlas sat outside and waited. That was the miracle Caleb noticed most. Not the dramatic kind, the patient kind, the kind that did not demand a room, only offered its presence at the edge of one. Hannah kept Noah's drawing on the thank you board where everyone could see it. The blue marker words had begun to curl slightly at the paper's edge, but no one took it down. He knew before the beeps did. Parents paused to read it. Nurses smiled as they passed. Even the security officer touched 2 fingers to the brim of his cap whenever Atlas entered, as if greeting an old colleague. One evening, after their visit, Caleb stood by the wide window near the elevators while sunset poured over the wet parking lot in pale gold. Hannah joined him with 2 cups of coffee, the same as before. Atlas sat between them, his reflection steady in the glass. He changed this floor, Hannah said. Caleb looked toward the pediatric wing, where a child laughed softly behind a half-open door. No, he said after a moment. He reminded it to listen. Hannah looked at him, and Caleb knew she understood. The hospital had not become less hard. Children still got tired. Parents still waited. Nurses still carried more than their hands could hold. But something gentle had been added to the weight. A German shepherd sitting on cold tile. A nurse trusting a silent signal. A Marine learning that not every warning arrives loud enough to be called proof. Later that night, back home, Caleb taped a copy of Noah's drawing beside his own kitchen calendar. Atlas lay beneath it, paws crossed, eyes half closed. Caleb stood there with one hand resting on the dog's head. The house was quiet. Not empty. Quiet. Outside, rain began again, soft over the organ roof. Caleb listened to it, then to Atlas breathing, then to the steady beat of his own heart. For years, he had thought grace would have to explain itself before he could believe in it. But grace had already sat down in a hospital hallway, refused to move, and waited until one tired nurse looked closely enough to understand. Caleb lowered himself to the floor beside Atlas. The dog shifted closer, warm and certain. No alarms, no commands, no applause. Just a man, a dog, and the peaceful truth that some miracles do not ask to be noticed. They simply stay until someone finally does.